Hi everybody, welcome back, glad you could tune in again. Okay, let's take a look at the book of Numbers, and here, okay, let's admit it, we do have, at first glance, a little bit more of a challenge than we might normally have in getting to grips with a book of the Bible. For many people, the book of Numbers looks a little bit inscrutable. It's hard to kind of figure out what's going on here, what the purpose of this book is. It doesn't seem entirely well connected to the everyday concerns of modern life, and the name itself doesn't help. I've even heard some people describe it as boring. Well, okay, I don't think it's boring. In fact, I absolutely think it's not boring. I think the book of Numbers is one of the most exciting books in the whole Bible. I'm going to show you some examples in a second. But, okay, the name doesn't help, does it? It gets the name in English from the survey that takes place in chapter 1, and then there's another survey or census in chapter 26, and just like a list of names of people and how many were in each tribe. Okay, fair enough, if you're just going to read one chapter, it doesn't look exactly inspiring, but I want to show you in a couple of minutes that even the numbers in the surveys are pretty significant and somewhat inspiring, or challenging at least, as well as everything else. Anyway, so basically what's going on in this book is we pick up the story, the narrative of Israel's history from the end of the book of Leviticus, and we're still in the wilderness between Egypt and the Promised Land. Chapter 1, verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month in the second year after they'd come out of the land of Egypt. So we're about 1 year after Exodus 16, which is the beginning of the Mount Sinai section of the Exodus narrative, and about 1 month after the end of the book of Exodus. So if you think of the book of Exodus narrates about a year, from the middle of the book of Exodus at Mount Sinai to the end, the giving of the law and then the construction of the tabernacle, that's about a year. Leviticus takes a month or so, and then you've got Numbers, and this begins a narrative in the book of Numbers which spans about 40 years, just less than 40 years, until they arrive at the end of the book of Numbers at the borders of the Promised Land. So Numbers is like the 4-decade-long, minus a couple of years, journey from Sinai all the way round to the east side of the Jordan, that long journey that the people of Israel took. And periodically they would stop and then camp there for a while, a few years or whatever, and then the presence of the Lord would move from the tabernacle, so they quickly pack up the tabernacle, pack up all their tents, and then they'd move along with it. Okay, so what's going on here? Let me highlight first a few of the action-packed episodes that take place in this book, just to whet your appetite and encourage you to get back into it, because really there's stuff in here which is totally without parallel anywhere else in the Bible. Where else can you find 500,000 people travelling through the desert, living in tents, on a journey of just a few hundred miles that should have taken them a couple of weeks, but ended up taking them 4 decades? There's something very strange going on here, for a start, and that's weird. The Lord is present with them permanently in this burning fiery cloud hovering over the strange tent, the tabernacle, that none of them are allowed to go near, and whenever the cloud moves they have to quickly carry up all their belongings and chase after it. You've got miraculous water streaming out of a rock, you've got miraculous food dropping out of the sky, you've got miraculous winds blowing in a flock of miraculous birds to provide food, and the flock is so vast that it covers all of the ground around the camp to the depth of about 1 metre for a 400 square mile area. This is weirdness. There's something very strange going on here. You'll find a plague of snakes, you find a miraculous stick that sprouts flowers, you've got a talking donkey that sees a vision of an angel, and you've got a combination of astonishing faithfulness and courage alongside grumbling and complaining and unfaithfulness that at one point it gets so bad that the entire earth opens up and swallows 3 entire families, complete with all their tents and all their belongings. And you've got battles and festivals and sacrifices and sermons, and then alongside all that you've got completely ordinary looking things that still look really strange to us, like instructions on how to make tassels for your garments, and what to do when you want to confess your sins, or how to deal with situations when people make false promises, and so on. And as I said, even the numbers on the list are intriguing, as I'll show you in a second or two. But there's just a ton of strange things in here. I was so intrigued by the book of Numbers that I preached a bunch of sermons on it a few years ago, and if I remember, I'll put the link in the description of the video. But it struck me just then as so intriguing. I wanted to major on the most unusual and surprising looking passages of the book. So probably if you find something you think, I don't know what this is about, probably I preached a sermon on it a while ago. If you're interested, you can dig that up. Anyway, okay, so what's the basic point of the book then? You've got all this strange events happening. You know when it takes place. So what's the connection to the modern Christian life? Well, the best way to highlight that is to take a look at a famous example of when the book of Numbers is quoted in the New Testament in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, which is something of a mini commentary on the overall narrative of Numbers as a whole. Let me read 1 Corinthians 10 from verse 1, just for a dozen verses or so, and then I'll make a comment or two on it. I want you to know, brothers, Paul writes to his Corinthian friends, that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Now you recognise there a description of some of the events leading up to the book of Numbers, and the events found in the book of Numbers. Through the sea, drinking from the rock, that kind of thing. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now that's why the journey took 40 years. Because God said, this generation has been rebellious and sinful. I'll let you find out why in the book itself. But then he said, as a judgment for that, he would cause them to remain in the wilderness till that entire generation had died away, passed away, and died out, and they were succeeded by the next generation. Actually, there's a slight exception to that, which I mentioned in one of the sermons, but again, I'll leave you to discover that for yourself. Now then, and here's the key thing, connecting the events of the book of Numbers to, so to speak, Christians in the modern world. Verse 6. Now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. That's the key point. All of the things that took place in the book of Numbers are examples to show us the kinds of things to avoid. The journey from Sinai to Canaan mirrors the journey that all of us take through our lives as Christians. And so to speak, in our pilgrimage through the wilderness of this world, we need to learn from our Israelite forefathers in the faith and not set our minds on wickedness as they did. In particular, he says, don't be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We mustn't indulge in sexual immorality, as some of they did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. We mustn't put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents. We mustn't grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, and were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. Notice, see again, this is as an example to us, on whom the end of the ages has come. So, if that's the overall point of the book of Numbers, that then helps us to get into some of the strange narratives, and at least to see in principle how they're connected with our lives today. Now, a couple of other things. One of the things Paul mentions, chapter 10, verse 10 of 1 Corinthians, do not grumble as some of them did. Grumbling is a major theme of the book of Numbers, and you find 3 or 4 different episodes of grumbling against Moses, against God, all for different kinds of reasons in the book of Numbers, and those grumbling narratives are very striking, very significant. In fact, of the at least 27 explicit references to the book of Numbers in the New Testament, over half of them are connected with Israel's sins in the wilderness. So that's one point to highlight. Now, the other point is those surveys that I mentioned, the numbers. And you look at these numbers and it's like your eyes glaze over, don't they? And you're thinking, what's the point of reading all these numbers? Well, look really carefully at the numbers in the first census in chapter 1. And then look really carefully at the numbers in the second census in chapter 26. You'll notice most of the tribes are about the same or a bit bigger, as you'd expect. About a generation has passed, they'll be a bit bigger. But there's one tribe which has been decimated completely. Something like 2/3 of its numbers, the numbers of its members, have died somehow, and their numbers have dropped so steeply between chapter 1 and chapter 26. And you ask yourself, why is that? Well, go and check which tribe it is, and then look at chapter 25 and see if you can figure out why it was that that tribe diminished in number so dramatically, and you'll find an explicit reference to the reason why if you look carefully enough, and that will teach you something about the horrific cost of unfaithfulness to the Lord. One way in which the book of Numbers is an example to us so that we should not set our minds on evil things as they did. Okay, that's enough, I think, of the book of Numbers. I hope there's been enough to encourage you to get back into it if it's been a while since you last read it, and to show you some ways into it, some paths into it if you're inclined to do so. The Lord bless you, and I hope very much to see you soon. Bye for now.